here. Go down the road. Come on. Come down. Come down.
Come on, down.
Who else is in the house?
This is Kimberly Sullivan. On February 17th, 2025, she was having a rather uneventful day. That is, until her stepson purposely set fire to their home. Without missing a beat, Sullivan grabbed one of her dogs and swiftly escaped the burning domicile, yelling for the arsonist to do the same. But the 31-year-old refused to move out of the home until emergency services arrived. Firefighters were forced to remove the nearly 6-foot man from the home, and were horrified to discover that he was below 70 pounds. As paramedics worked on him, he admitted to starting the fire, and said only one word when asked why he did it: freedom.
Who else is in here?
My stepson is in here.
How many other people?
Help him out.
Listen,
That's it. I have 2 cats.
Everybody's out?
Yes.
But your stepson's still inside?
Yeah, he's right here.
Okay,
yes.
come out. Come down the road. Come on, come on.
Well,
It's not safe to stay here. Come on.
All right, here he is. All right, my dog is shaking.
I know. Come down here. That's true. 87 code 33. Victim. Fire victim.
Okay.
Come on.
My
80
dog
seconds right here.
is. I
Come
know
on.
my dog.
I know. Come on.
I'm coming.
You've seen it. Got one victim right here. I need to stay over here.
Welcome back to another episode of Dreading, or if this is your first time here, welcome. Today we're going to be covering the slowly progressing case of Kimberly Sullivan. This will include the arguments her attorney is putting forward in court and the frankly horrific nature of her crimes. This is not the first time we've covered a case of parental abuse, or a case of parental kidnapping and neglect, but this is one of the worst we have come across, despite the victim ultimately surviving. With that said, if you are sensitive at all to stories of that nature, I would urge you to click off of the video now. Your mental well-being should be the utmost priority for you, and if you can take anything away from this video, let it be that. This topic was initially requested via our Patreon, as one of our supporters felt it bore a striking resemblance to the case of Lacey Fletcher, Timothy Vander Ark, and Rudy Farias. If there's a video you would like to see made on the channel or a topic you want to bring more attention to, let us know by emailing us at dreading.official@gmail.com. We're consistently combing through your suggestions and adding them to our list, so we can begin our research process. But be aware, we are a very small team, so it will take us some time. But with all of that said, let us begin. The identity of the victim in this case has not been made public for his own safety and well-being. With that in mind, we will be referring to him as S. According to News Nation, S was placed in his father's custody after his biological mother determined that she was not capable of providing him and his sister with adequate care. This was not a decision she came to lightly, and she hoped that both of her children would have a better life than she could provide. Her sister was placed into foster care, where she would go on to be put in custody of a loving family. S was then placed into the care of Craig and Kimberly Sullivan, his biological father and stepmother, and it was there where his torture began. According to the police interview that the 31-year-old gave while in the hospital shortly after the arson, he would begin drinking toilet water at the age of 3. Neither his father nor stepmother was concerned about his physical health or general well-being, to the point to where they would limit his access to food and water as a punishment. They were considered luxuries, to the point where he would state that drinking water out of the toilet became second nature to him. It was the only consistent way he could get water, but even that was limited. The couple would put locks on almost every door in the home, barring him from leaving his room or whatever room they gave him access to. Most days, he was kept in his 8x9 room for 22 hours, and only allowed to leave to do household chores. But sometimes he wouldn't be allowed to leave at all. His lack of access to the bathroom led to multiple horrific habits forming. Firstly, the man would tell police that he hadn't taken a proper shower in years, which was evidenced by severe matting. Similarly, his teeth were actively rotting out of his mouth. Without access to a bathroom, S would have to devise creative solutions to relieve himself during the day. If he needed to pee, he would use a bottle in his bedroom, then empty the bottle through a series of straws out of his bedroom window. If he needed to poop, he would gather a bunch of newspaper or trash in the corner of his room and relieve himself on it. Then, using an old t-shirt that he was slowly unraveling, tie up the waste and throw it away the next time he was let out. He informed the police that he would usually throw his waste away in the kitchen garbage can, which they were able to confirm during their investigation. Because of the extreme circumstances he was raised under, A bathroom was considered a privilege. If he was given access to a private bathroom, he would then use the toilet water to drink and bathe himself, understanding that the porcelain seat would likely be his own interaction with a decent amount of water for the next few days. His small bedroom didn't have access to heat or air conditioning, but it did feature a small window where he could look out on the world. One neighbor would tell the news that they were unaware that S was living in the house for 20 years. They recalled that their daughter had once told them that they saw a little boy waving at her from the window overlooking their backyard while she was playing, and that the boy looked extremely frail. Because the adults had not seen the child, and neither Kimberly nor Craig claimed that they had a son, they surmised that their daughter had simply let her imagination run away with her. It was only after the fire that they realized the gravity of what she had seen. Police believe the sighting had been legitimate, and he had probably been an older teen at that point, but looked considerably younger due to malnutrition. But the Sullivans hadn't always isolated S to the home. When they first got custody of the boy, they had enrolled him at Barnard Elementary School in Waterbury, Connecticut. Multiple members of staff at the school would come forward and talk about how they had raised alarm bells around the young boy, believing that he was being heinously neglected. The former principal, Tom Panon, would tell NBC Connecticut that the staff had called the Department of Children and Families at least 20 times in the 6 years the boy was enrolled there. His classmates would also raise concerns about the boy, and the exact number of reports into the Sullivans is unknown. The school staff noted that he was extremely small and thin, and was disturbingly territorial about food. At the age of 5, he would regularly be caught eating out of the trash and scavenging for his classmates' food. One teacher would pull him to the side and ask him directly about why he was so hungry, and the boy would admit that there were times that he, quote, was not allowed food at home, unquote. Besides just calling DCF, Tom would state that the teachers and other staff began bringing the boy lunch themselves, wanting to ensure that he was cared for in some way. S also exhibited extreme food aggression, and would often eat well beyond what was necessary when he was given access to any food. This is likely because he was in a constant state of starvation. Food, like using the toilet, was not viewed as a daily occurrence, and not something that he could rely on. So every time he was given access to food, he would feel the need to overeat, even if it meant that he would make himself physically ill. Despite the multiple calls, reports indicate that DCF only spoke to the boy twice, and each time he'd been instructed to lie by his father and stepmother. How they determined nothing was wrong when the boy was very obviously physically malnourished, and the home was borderline uninhabitable makes very little sense, especially with the amounts of calls to the department from various members of the public. The abuse in this case was extremely obvious to the adults who were present, so much so that they spent their own time and the little money that they had taking care of the little boy. But after the boy was questioned when he was 11 years old, he would be pulled out of the school. In April of 2025, the police would confirm that they and the DCF had been called to the Sullivan home in 2005 over concerns about the boy's well-being. He hadn't been at school for days, and according to the report, his classmate was worried that he had died. The police reports would then be publicized through a Freedom of Information Act request, which they for some reason tried to argue against. Eventually, the public was granted access to the files, which showed that the responding officers found, quote, no immediate signs of abuse, unquote, and that the home was clean. The reports, both Kimberly and Craig felt as if they were being harassed by DCF, as well as Tom, and actively complained to the officers about it. They informed the police that they would be homeschooling their son from then on, and the case was closed. According to Tom, the Sullivans initially lied to the school and stated that they had enrolled him in a public school in the area, but he was unable to find any record of the transfer. When he confronted the Sullivans, he was then told that the boy was going to be homeschooled. This alarmed him, and he tried to verify that the case had been looked into by the proper authorities. But ultimately he was told that this was not his place, and that his continued interest would be considered harassment. After that, S was only allowed outside on one occasion, when he would have been either 14 or 15, and his father brought him to the town dump. When the 31-year-old was originally found, he was under 70 pounds. He likely weighed less than the last time he was allowed outside decades earlier. That is more than likely the reason that Craig and Kimberly decided to keep him isolated as much as possible. They were aware that his physical deterioration reflected poorly on them, and that they could be penalized for their treatment of S, but they refused to change their behavior, beyond hiding him from the world. But in 2024, something would change. Craig, S's biological father and only link to Kimberly, would die. Kimberly was now solely responsible for the home and her stepson's well-being. He hadn't been outside in over 10 years. He'd never been taken to the doctors. He hadn't finished school and faced a long road ahead of him, assuming he was going to move beyond the extreme conditions he was brought up under. And according to Sullivan's lawyer, Ioannis Kaloidis, the stepmother was ready and willing to provide that assistance, but only if he were to ask for it directly. In her mind, he was an adult man, therefore was responsible for himself. At the time of writing, Kimberly's defense is that her husband was solely responsible for S prior to his death, and that she didn't take part in any of his care. Any abuse that happened in her presence was not her doing or responsibility, and that the, quote, abuse, unquote, only continued after his death because S was unwilling to better his own circumstances. She claims that since her husband's demise, she hadn't locked her son in his room or forced him to do anything that he didn't want to do. Basically, the last year of imprisonment had been entirely his own doing. However, the veracity of that statement is lacking, given the fact that her stepson was willing to die in his attempt to escape from the home. According to S, his life had only gotten worse after his father's death. Though he had been extremely isolated and abused by his dad, he would tell police that at the very least, Craig had allowed him a bit more freedom than Kimberly. He would state that his father would allow him outside of his room, specifically when his stepmother was out of the house. These occasions seemed especially important to the emaciated adult, as they would watch television together. In the year that had elapsed since his father's death, Kimberly hadn't allowed him to shower, or brush his hair, or brush his teeth. His circumstances had become so dire that when he found a lighter in the pocket of one of his father's old jackets, he came up with a plan. He was able to smuggle a small bottle of hand sanitizer and some computer paper back into his room, and after making peace with the fact that he could perish in his attempts for freedom, he lit the room ablaze. His actions were not unlike a wolf, chewing through its own leg to escape a snare, and showcased how truly terrified he must have been. This wasn't the action of a man who, like Kimberly would go on to argue, could have walked out of the house of his own volition. He felt as if he didn't act, he probably would die. Kimberly would be taken into custody on March 12, 2025, a month after the fire, and would be charged with first-degree assault, second-degree kidnapping, unlawful restraint in the first degree, cruelty to persons, and reckless endangerment in the first degree, which she would plead not guilty to. Her lawyer would state that there is virtually no direct evidence against Sullivan, besides S's testimony, and that her intention is to fight against the accusation in court. Based on previous cases we have covered regarding this kind of abuse, if she is going to take this case all the way to court, she will likely take the stand in her own defense. Like Shanda Vander Ark, it seems that Kimberly doesn't feel as if she's done anything wrong. She feels justified in her treatment of her stepson, and likely would believe that if the public was given her point of view, we probably would have acted the same way that she did. It's inconceivable to her that her actions were as terrible as they've been made to look to the public, even though the pictures and direct evidence doesn't lie. But we hope it doesn't come to that. On April 15th, 2025, S would release a statement to Survivors Say, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing victims like S with free strategic communication services and resources. He has a long, difficult road ahead of him, and through their assistance, he's getting the care he needs. His statement reads, quote, "Please call me S. This is not the name given to me by my parents when I was born. I am choosing a new name for myself, and I will use that name as I reclaim control over my life and my future. My name is my choice, and it is the first of many choices I will make for myself now that I am free. I am speaking out today to begin the process of reclaiming my life, and to have my say in how my story is told. I am much better and stronger than I was the day the first responders carried me out of the home. I am beyond grateful for the care I have received since then. To all the healthcare professionals who have helped and nurtured me, thank you. In addition to all of your care, I appreciate the chance to have my first ever birthday party to celebrate turning 32. I also want to thank the first responders, the law enforcement investigators, and everyone who is working to hold those responsible for my abuse accountable. Thank you to everyone at Safe Haven Waterbury and everyone who has given to the GoFundMe page that will cover some of the overwhelming expenses I will face in the weeks, months, and years to come. I am grateful to the conservator and my attorney, who will help guide me through the legal process ahead. They've been invaluable to me, and I am grateful for their tireless support. Much has already been said that tells part of the story of the abuse I endured. Someday, perhaps my whole story will be told. S. Unquote. As of today, the trial of Kimberly Sullivan is still pending, although there was one notable ruling in the case that we feel very strongly about. As S mentioned, he changed his name in order to feel a sense of safety and reclaim a bit of agency in his life. He no longer wanted to share his identity with the people who abused him. However, Kimberly and her lawyers argued that they should be given that personal, private information, and the judge agreed. This past November, the judge ruled that she would be given access to his location and his new name, which S wanted to keep away from her. But that is where the case stands now. If you've made it to this part of the video, thank you so much for watching, and have a great day, and remember, stay safe.